Good afternoon and welcome again. It's been a couple of days we did the video last. So many things has been going on, and there's been so many tournaments, so many events. Work is happening, life is happening. But yeah, definitely had to do a video today, and the video today is actually centered around Tanitoluwa. Tanitoluwa, the child prodigy, the American Nigeria or Nigerian American, whichever way you call it, even though he's playing on the American flag. He's a whiskey. He's a pretty strong player. He's actually participating at the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Championship, presently going on in New York City. And of course, New York is his hometown. Well, you know what I mean. He's based in New York. So I have two games I want to show you that Tani played. Now, one thing you have to like about Tani is he likes to fight. No matter what the position is, he's fighting. And that's one thing we have to learn from this kid. Having one position is good, but sometimes when you're not winning, your opponent still has to win the game. You have to do something. You have to make something happen. If you don't have enough to make it happen, I'm sorry about that. So there are two games I want to show you. The first game is the game he played against Grandmaster Anderson Mads, who's actually a three times Danish champion. Three times Danish champion from Denmark. Rated 25-30. This was in I think the 10th or ninth round. And Tani had a white pieces, and this was the Goko piano. So without much ado, let us get right into this game. Tani was on the white side. He started off the game with the move e4. e5 was played. Knight f3, knight to c6. These are the normal, typical moves you see in an e4, e5 opening. Bishop c4. Bishop puts pressure on the pawn on f7. This is for the very basic stuff, knight to f6, d3. Normally in this position, d3 is played. After d3, bishop to c5. I was going to say something here. Normally in this position, this move actually always invites the fried lever, the knight g5, pressure on the pawn on f7. And after d5, pawn takes, knight take doesn't work because knight takes is very strong, followed by queen f3 and all hell break loose. So this is not what happened in this game. I won't say the new theory, but mainly the big boys. What they normally play in this position after knight f6 is just d3. They support the pawn, play c3, castle, short, and go for a long time maneuvering, which we're going to see in this game. So d3 is played, bishop to c5, putting the bishop to the most aggressive square, putting pressure on f2. Bishop to c5 is played, and castles. Black plays d6. d6 is a good move here. Protecting the bishop, protecting the pawn on e5, giving room for the bishop to come to g4. Now, white has to be very careful here. For example, in this position, c3 is played, knight b2 is played, and h3 is also played. So here, you don't want to play rook e1 right away because of the pressure on f2. And after you move rooks back, there's castle, and then there's always the move f5 at some point, although we can't do that right now because of the bishop of c4. So in this position, d6 is played, pawn goes to c3, a6. This is not just a prophylactic move. By playing a6, you're keeping an eye on the idea to play b5 at some point, and also creating a point for bishop to move back to a7 here, the bishop has to, because of the possible threat of move d4. So a4 is played, clamping down on a possible b5 in the future. Bishop goes to a7, rook to e1. Now, black castles, bishop to g5. Now, in this position, white says, you know what, I'm going to bring my bishop out, pin your knight to the queen, and try to make things very uncomfortable for you. Of course, I'm going to continue with my knight on d2, knight on f4, knight on e3, and maybe knight on d5 at some point in time, depending on how black plays against this. Black immediately asks white some questions. Hey, young man, what are you going to do with your bishop on g5? You're going to take on f6 or you're going to back up? He says, well, I'm going to back my bishop up. And the GM says, well, I'm going to ask you more questions. I'm going to play g5. You want to take twice on g5, and hope to exploit the pin on the queen, or you're just going to back with g3. So Tani says, I'm just going to back up. Now, basically in this position, black has a very big score against white in this position. So if you're somebody that plays this line, either on the white side or the black side, you have to know this, that black stands better. That means uh, black gets better play from this position. See, this is where the story of this game goes. So already black is better. Think about this. Black is better. Black is the high-rated player. Tani is 2262, even though his rating doesn't reflect his true strength. The GM is 2512 with a lot of experience. He has a better position against Tani. But let's see how this game continues. So bishop g3 is played, knight to h7. What's the point of knight to h7? Of course, one of the reasons why the knight always moves away from the f file is to launch an attack with f5, f4. Of course, you cannot do that right now because of the bishop putting pressure on that diagonal. So as a point in time, you're going to have to step your king to g7 on h8 so that you can actually have the f5 move, trying to put some more pressure on white's position. And of course, you have to keep an eye on the rook on f file, putting pressure on f2, and the bishop on a7, putting pressure on f2. These are things you always have to watch out for in the game. It is very, very important because if you don't watch out for these things, when these things come to you, there might be a big surprise, but there might be a surprise you don't want. So knight h7 was played, knight to d2. White develops his last minor piece. Of course, we always talk about this. You always want to get your minor piece in the game as quick as possible. Knight b2 is played. King h8, I just mentioned this. Like in this position, king would have to vacate either to g5 or to h5 so that I can move the pawn. But actually in this position, the king didn't really have to move right away. The books, the theory says, the engine says h5 is a good move. What's the idea? With the idea of h4. Trying to make this life of this bishop very uncomfortable. And by the move h5, white would have to push some pawns in this part of the board. Now there's a problem with that because anytime you would have to move a pawn where you've been attacked, you're going to get in some big trouble. So king h8 is played in this position on knight f1. What's the idea of knight f1? Of course, trying to reshuffle the pieces. Knight f1, you can go to e3, keeping an eye on d5, you can go to e3, keeping an eye on g4, you can go to e3, keeping an eye on the f5 square. So you have a lot of possibilities, just trying to arrange your pieces the best way. And of course, in this position, you're still looking to play this d4 move, which is very interesting and a good move at the same time. Why is it a very good move? Because you're putting pressure on the pawn on e5, and then you're blocking the bishop on a7 away from looking at your king on f2. So let's keep going. h5, f5 is played, h4. Yeah, you have to play h4, and I think one of the reasons with the h4 move is trying to make sure that this, of course, the pawn doesn't advance. If you play h3, the pawn can always advance, and then it's pawn push, and then you're going to be in a lot of trouble, especially when you don't have a bishop to counter the bishop on g4. The bishop is outside the pawn chain. You wish the bishop was on e2, but in this situation, this is not the time to start wishing. h4 is played here. G4 is played. Knight to h2. White position doesn't look good. White position doesn't look good. But the thing is, black still has to make a way to make this position, to try to exploit that particular put it that way. After knight h3 to h2, f5, you have to play f5. Although that was the best move here. Knight e7 was the better move. Knight e7, knight e7, knight g6, knight f4. A lot of possible moves here. And this king is not going to be looking really good. So f5 is played here. Now we have to remember that this is a rapid game. I think it's the 10 plus 5, I'm not sure, maybe 10 plus 2, 10 minutes, 2-second increment of 5 seconds. I'm not so sure about it. But this is a rapid play. So that means you have to come up with your right plan and also be able to execute the plan timely. f5 is played, captures on f5. Of course, you have to capture because the threat is to play f4, winning the bishop on g3. You don't want that. So takes back. No, it didn't take back. It moves the knight to e7. Now, the idea is to capture back with the knight, put pressure on the pawn, the bishop on g3, put pressure on the pawn on h4, and just trying to run up white's king. So, knight e3 is played. The idea is to protect the pawn. Now, the bishop captures back with the rook. Knight takes f5. In this position, Tani played very interesting d4. Wow, like I said, these are things that will give you an idea of how much of a fighting spirit this boy has. He said, you know what, instead of you taking my pawn, I prefer to give you a rook. Take an exchange. But if you think about it, taking the exchange I still think is good for black. But this is not just about a theoretical game or it's becoming a mind game. So the boy is trying to say, hey, if you want the rook, go ahead and take the rook. I will make do with the other pieces I have and see what happens. So knight takes rook, f takes. It plays knight to f6. Now, Why is an exchange down for? Absolutely not much. Apart, of course, he has the two bishop, but the bishop is not really doing much. This is the one on c4 is fine, but the bishop on g3 not doing much. So after the move knight f6, takes on e5. I wouldn't do that because I don't want to have to mess up the pawn chain. So what would have been a good move here? Probably queen c2, trying to get the queen here, rook f1, then this knight has to really get in the game somehow. You have to find a place for this knight. Of course, one thing white has going well for him right now is these guys are not in the game yet. Because once these guys have the chance to get in the game, then it might not be so easy for the white pieces. Takes on d4, knight goes to e4. Bishop to f4 says, I'm going to keep my knight. I don't want you to take that. After bishop f4, queen takes h4. At this point, the engine says this is actually even, or very slight advantage for white. It's interesting. And I don't think it's so far-fetched, because think about it. These guys are not yet in the game. So you have 1, 2, 3 fighting against 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4, although the rook is not in the game yet as well. But one thing you also have to realize is this king is very exposed. So this king might not be looking so good at the end of the day. So in this position, Tani blundered here, played queen to d5. Of course, the idea is to capture the knight, but he actually had a better move here. G3 was a very good move, because after takes, now we have e takes d6, threatening to win the piece, and then we also have queen check. And this king is just very exposed, especially with the three bishops. The three bishops trying to get to this king at some point in time. So, but in this position, Tani plays queen d5, not the best move, but you also have to realize this is a rapid, okay? So queen d5, bishop to f5 protects the knight, connects the rooks. That's a very good move. Rook to f1 gets the last piece in the game. Pawn push attacks the queen. Queen goes to e5, threatening it is covered. Pawn push, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to d3, not the best move here. Bishop a2 would have been a better move. Maybe bishop a2, bishop here, so that the queen has some rooms to move back to. So he plays bishop to d3, and then he plays pawn push. It is queen takes d5. It takes rook to d1, rook to d8. Tani made a very interesting move here, which I like, even though it's still not looking good. But this is what I said about the boy. He keeps fighting. It's not over until it's over. Bishop takes d5. He says, you know what, I'm going to give my queen. Not because it's the best move, but because it puts the pressure on white, on black, to make something out of this. So it takes back, bishop takes. Now, bishop to d3, attacking the rook on f1. Rook to d1. Bishop goes to e2. g3 gets an in-between move. It plays queen to d8. Rook attacks the queen. Rook attacks the bishop. Bishop to c4. e4. Takes. Now, this is where I think black pretty much gave back the advantage. Although white is still winning, black is still winning, but you can't give white all these possibilities. He has these pieces to really cause some problems for you. And this rook is not really doing much. It's no open files right now this rook can use. Everywhere is pretty much closed. And this king is still also problematic. And of course, having these two connected pawns, black has some things to worry about. And in a rapid game, it's not something you can overcome real quickly. So let's keep going. Rook takes, that's the last straw that broke black's back. Takes on f4. Queen goes to h4, threatening check. He says, no, I don't want you to have any checks. It brings the king. The idea of bringing the king is to try to blockade, but you can never blockade two pawns supported by rook. That's not going to happen. So pawn push starts pushing the pawn. King goes to g6. Pawn push right into queen. Queen blockade, we all know this. Queen is a bad piece when it comes to blockading. Knight goes to g3. Pawn push attacks the knight. Pawn push check. Move the king back. King says, I'm not moving back, I'm moving forward. Pawn push ready to play e7, and then followed by the move d8, getting a queen. King goes to f4. After the king f4, white ran out of time. White ran out of time because really there's the pawn push, queen takes, pawn push, queen. If you check here, I have knight comes back here, protecting this. Everything is protecting each other, and this game is just pretty much over. So that was the, I think the round 9 game Tani played. Very, very impressive game. But wait a minute, we're not done yet. There's another game I want to show us here that Tani played. And this was a game he played in round, think it was, I think it was round 10. This was the game he played against Grandmaster Andy Woodward. Another very interesting game here. Another Kuko piano. So the game starts with the move e4. After the move e4, after the move e4, e5 is played, right? Then we have knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. We've been here before. Knight f6, d3, h6. It's just very interesting move. Very interesting move for black. It's been played by Magnus, so many other strong players. A4, d6. In this position, black decided to shut the bishop in, not bringing the bishop to c5. A little bit conservative. Doesn't mean it's weaker, but just a little bit conservative. Bishop c5 is actually the stronger move in this position, well, the most played, I would say. So d6 is played, knight c3. Now, with the move d6, it's a different ball game. We don't necessarily have to stick for the c3, d4. Here we can just move the knight to c3. So because we don't have a bishop on d4, we're trying to arouse with the c3, d4 push. So knight c3 makes a lot of sense here. You have to know your openings. G6, castles. Of course, the idea of G6 is to make sure the bishop comes to the G7 square. Now that we have this punching, the bishop is being blocked out, we needed to get that bishop to another part of the game where it's going to have some influence. So after the move G6, bishop G7 is played, bishop to E3, castles, A5. I like this move. It's a space gaining move. Pretty much, shorten the hand of black on that side of the board. Because black would love to have his pawn on E5 as possible. White says, no, I'm not going to give you that privilege. And of course, you can't play B6 now because you're just going to lose. No, you're not going to lose the pawn. But take, even if you take back, you're going to give me the file. That could be problematic. So A5 is played, A6, knight to E2. Now watch this move. The knight on C3 stops D5, right? So the idea of knight E2 is to try to relocate the knight. I really don't know where Tani is going right here. I don't really know why that move. Because after the knight to G3, you really don't have any square here. So what's the point of knight to E2? We're not sure. But guess what the GM played after knight to E2? He played D5. He struck in the center immediately. Another thing I have to tell you, GM Woodward Andy is a newly crowned, I would say, he became a GM not so long ago. A very young kid, very strong player, and he's actually had a very impressive tournament at the New York Rapid and Blitz himself. And I think probably I'll actually go through one of the games he won. He's been playing very impressively in this game. So D5 is played, captures back, knight goes to G3. Like I said, I don't know where Tani is going with this knight because you don't have that square, you don't have that square. Maybe you want to come to the E4 square, but then if you're on the E4 square, what are you trying to do on the E4 square? I don't see much going on from the E4 square, but only Tani knows what's happening here. So after the move knight to G3, bishop to E6, developing the last minor piece, bishop to C5, putting pressure on the rook. And one thing you also have to realize is in a rapid game, you're not necessarily going to look for the best move, you're always just going to look for a good move. Because it's very important to make a good move and then stay in the game so that you're not so short. Because when it comes to time problem, you could really run into a lot of difficulties. So bishop c5, I don't really like the move bishop c5 because guess what? The rook belongs to the e8 square anyway. So you're pretty much helping black to get to where it wants to be. So rook to e8 is played. Rook to e1, b6, captures back. Bishop goes back to e3. So I'm going to ice this question. So what's the point of bishop c5, bishop e3? That move actually has helped black more than it has helped white. So bishop goes to e3, b5, bishop goes to a2, knight c to b4. I don't know why Tani captured here. If I have this position, I probably would have moved my bishop to e2. I don't know what. Oh, okay, I see what Tani was afraid of. If bishop to e2, there's knight takes e3. If rook takes e3, there's bishop takes b3. If pawn takes, there's knight takes, or there's queen takes, and that's just losing. And I think that's what Tani saw, and that's why the bishop takes on d5, and knight takes. Now, black can post of the two bishops. And if you look at this position, black's pawn looks pretty good and very flexible. So this bishop is about to get into the game with a lot of vengeance. So you can't really say a lot about white pieces because white pieces are not really doing a whole lot here. The queen is passive, the knights are really passive. Why do I say the knights are passive? Even though the knights are looking good, but the question is, where do they have, what squares do they have that they can go, that they can boost up being looking good? None. So that's why I said white is passive, even though the pieces are looking good. Of course, the only active piece, the only piece that looks good in this position for white is the rook on a1. Why? Because it's on an open, half open file. So a plan for black in this white in this position will be to try to get the rooks doubled on the a file, or maybe tripled, and put pressure on the a file. That could be something white should be looking to do. But I don't think that's what happened in this game. So bishop goes to d2. Now it's very important to keep your bishops. I say this all the time. You want to keep your bishop because you don't know the nature of the game. If you're going to keep your bishop, if the position opens on fire, if it does, not all of the time you have close position. But it's always good to keep your bishop to try to see what nature of the game is going to be. Queen to c7, connecting the rooks, putting pressure on the pawn on c2. Bishop a5 gains a tempo on the queen. The queen goes to d6. Knight e4 gains another tempo on the queen. Queen goes to c6. d4. I don't like d4. Well, but the thing is, what will black do white do anyway? Now, if white decides to open up this position, it should know fully well he's playing against the guy that has the two bishops. So the opening of the position is only going to help the person that has the bishop. But the thing is, black's pieces are so well situated that any opening of this position is going to favor black. So d4 is played, captures back. Queen goes to c4. Of course, you don't want to capture because if you capture, queen takes, bishop here, there's going to be a lot of weakness on the dark squares. So c3 is played, protecting the knight. Knight goes to f4. Queen d3 attacking the knight. Knight goes to d3. Rook e3 attacking the knight. Knight goes to e5. Queen g3, still putting pressure on the knight. Now, what does white gain here? You could say that white's pieces are looking a bit more active than they were earlier. And that could be traced to the fact that black hasn't really created any pressure on white's pieces. So let's keep going. Queen to d5, threatening nothing. Bishop to c7, threatening, putting pressure on the knight. Knight goes to c4. Rook to e2. Now, we can see that white's pieces are looking way better than what we saw earlier. Black hasn't really been able to create anything with the very good position he had. So, rook to e2, f5. This is where white lost the game. Now, this is one thing we always have to watch out for. If I can get this knight check here, right, without the bishop and the pawn, I win the queen. So that's a motive you always have to think about. Now, well, the GM has 3 minutes left. Tiny even had 1 minute. But you always have to think about this possibility. If I can get a knight here, there's a double attack. So what's the problem with this move here? The problem with this move is we have the knight attacking the bishop, we have the rook attacking the bishop, and we have a possible queen that can attack the same bishop. So we can have 3 pieces attacking the bishop on e6, and it's only supported by the rook on e and the queen on d5. And of course, after knight f6 check, the tables turn in one move. I said in the last game, Tani is a guy you don't want to play around with. If you give him one chance, that's all it takes. Knight f6 check, and the game completely turns. Bishop takes, queen takes, g6 check, bishop goes back, knight takes e6. All of a sudden, from having a slightly worse position to a winning position against the 25-30 grandmaster. Rook to e7, triples, double the rooks on the d5. This is just crushing. This is just pretty much over. So having a beautiful position doesn't win games. You have a beautiful position, doesn't win game. You still need the skill to be able to get that game done. King goes to h8, not a good move. c4. White had a stronger move here. Knight here was very, very strong. Just threatening checkmate. I just want to checkmate you on. You don't have the time to take my rook here because I'm going to mate you on h7. And if you take my rook here, I will take spread these, and this is pretty much over. So, but you have to realize these guys are down to, Tani was down to a minute here, his opponent had a minute 23 seconds, but in a very totally lost position. c3, knight goes to d6. Now, one thing we have to be really careful about is, even in this position, there is no point harassing this knight that is doing nothing already. You don't want the knight to come and affect all the whatever equilibrium you have in this position. Like I said, knight g5 just wins the game. So after the move c4, knight goes to d6, bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, knight to f8, threatening checkmate. This is where Tani is dangerous, man. Apart from the fact he's a fighter, he's also a tactician. If there's a tactics, he's going to say it. Knight to f8, bishop takes, queen takes queen, rook takes, queen comes back, takes back. Now we have the two rook and the bishop against the queen. And with all the pawns here, black just has absolutely no chance. So let's keep going. Bishop to g7, b4 is played, rook to a6, c8, putting pressure on the pawn on c3. Queen goes to d, e6, threatening to take the rook and the pawn. Rook takes pawn, threatening checkmate. g3, not today. We can't allow that. Rook attacks the other pawn. Queen takes a6. Rook takes b4. Check. King moves. Queen takes. King moves. Pawn push. Rook to e to b2. You will think black has some chances here, but absolutely not. Really. All white needs to do is just try to get a pawn here or try to get a king somewhere here. And there's going to be checkmate here. So let's keep going. Queen check. King moves. Queen check again. King moves. Queen goes to g6. What's the point? The plan is pawn push, and then this just falls. Pawn push, not the best move, but there's really not a lot black can do this position. Pawn push, check, king moves, check, king moves. Rook attacks the pawn. Queen check, queen goes there, attacking the pawn, threatening its cover check with the bishop. He said, you know what, you can have the pawn. He said, no, not right away. I want to take the pawn now. So what are you going to do? He says, no, I'm going to push the pawn. I don't want you to get my pawn. He says, well, I'm going to play my king to h5. I want to go to g6 so I can mate you on e8. He said, well, I'm just going to move my rook to, what square is that? I'm going to move my rook to d2 so that once your king goes to g6, I'm going to check you there. He says, well, I'm going to just push my pawn anyway since you mean business. He says, bishop goes back. Now queen threatens to take the bishop. Rook check, king goes to h4. Rook check, king goes to h3. King moves, pawn push check, king move, queen check, and the game is all over. Impressive wins from a back-to-back round, rounds 9 and 10 by Tanitoluwa. Very good game, very good fighting game. Like I said, one thing you have to learn from this boy is the ability to fight. Presently, I was to speak, the Blitz tournament is still going on. We'll be able to see if we can get you some games from the Blitz event. But meanwhile, there are so many other events that were going on. I mean, even from this rapid, there's some very interesting games that I'm going to bring over to you. Oh, anyway, it's been a very cold winter, and we thank God for everything. See you soon. Take care. God bless, and bye for now.